Welcome to Process Better, the latest Beyond Clean series where we dive deep into the workflows, best practices, and innovations that drive excellence in sterile processing. From point-of-use cleaning to set assembly, inventory intelligence, and beyond, we're tackling the biggest challenges in surgical services with real, actionable solutions. Each episode, we'll break down the details, challenge the status quo, and help you refine your process for better outcomes. Process Better is proudly sponsored by Medline. More than a medical supplier, we make healthcare run better. And now, sit back and stay tuned as we explore what it takes to improve, innovate, and process better. Every instrument, every time. All right, Clean Freaks, welcome back to the Beyond Clean podcast, the Process Better podcast, sponsored by Medline. We've got a great conversation for you today. Episode 2 of this new podcast series titled Navigating Instrument Damage, Care, Handling, and Quality. Which one of us hasn't heard a presentation on instrument care and handling before? It's definitely an important topic. It's one that touches all of us, and we've got just the right gal to talk us through these issues. We're inviting back Tory Teakell. If you didn't catch episode 1, had a great talk around point of use treatment, a talk so good we had to bring her back to talk about care and handling in our departments, but not just that instruments get damaged, but what as leaders, what as technicians can we do about persisting problems with damage in our departments in a positive direction. So got lots of questions to dive into on this one. It's going to be a good one. Sit tight. We'll be right back. And joining us back in studio now is Tory Teakell. Tori, welcome back to the show.
Glad to be here, as always.
Great. Tori, I would say now that you've been with us a couple of times here on the Beyond Clean podcast, we'll officially bestow the title of friend of the show to you. So yeah, excited to have you back after that great conversation we had in episode 1. Again, for those who maybe missed episode 1 or aren't familiar with you, you mentioned to us in that first episode that you're the clinical solutions manager at Medline and talked to us a little bit about your career trajectory. But as we're diving in this second episode into instrument damage, care, handling, quality, could you maybe underline a couple of things from your background and experience that has made instrument care, handling, and quality really important to you personally?
So understanding instrument quality and capturing instruments when they're damaged is all about patient safety. As an SPD manager, we want to make sure that our patients are safe and we're providing good quality instruments to perform our procedures. And then also as an SPD manager, if we send an instrument out for repair, we're either going to have a replacement or we're not. And if those instruments come back and they're non-repairable, that's a cost. So we want to really, really make sure that we're taking care of our instruments, treating them like gold, because some of them can cost thousands of dollars, right? So 1, you want to make sure your instruments are the best quality for your patients. And then 2, you want to prevent any damage because it's a big, big cost.
Yeah, for sure. I remember being a sterile processing technician and hearing from my supervisor how much some of these devices that I was handling cost and thinking, good grief, I could buy 2 new cars with what they spent on this surgical camera. So
exactly.
Yeah, it's definitely a reality to think about. And we always joked that we've gotten into the wrong business. We should be making medical devices. Because good
That's
grief,
right.
Some of those things are expensive. Well, yeah, so I appreciate you sharing that with us as a sterile processing leader. Definitely a lot of lessons learned along the way about how to care for instruments. So as we dive into this topic, it seems like instrument damage is a universal problem in the department. Everybody's got a repair budget. Nobody's pleased with the amount of dollars they have in the repair budget, trying to figure out how to make it happen. So maybe you could walk us through, like, why is instrument damage such a hot button topic? Why is it on everybody's minds? Why is damage to our surgical instruments so common? I mean, they're made to be durable, at least for the most part. So why are we dealing with so much damage of surgical instruments in our SPDs and ORs?
I think some of the most common causes of instrument damage are improper cleaning or handling of our instruments. So either they're getting wiped down with saline on accident, that can cause corrosion for our instruments. We're not using the right detergents. We're not using the right disinfectants for the particular instrument that we have. And then we're not being cognizant of how we're loading those case carts. Either we're rushing or just not thinking about it. Hey, everything's stainless steel, not a big deal. We can stack everything on top of each other. And that is not how it works, especially when you have light cords. I'm thinking of arthroscopy right now. Light cords and your shavers, they're all delicate. They all have fiber optics. And then you put, your ACL tray right on top of that. You're going to damage the camera. And we all know camera and light cords are probably the most expensive items that we come across. Another common issue is maybe rough handling. We're not handling it with care, incorrect storage, we're stacking, we're not placing them properly, we're shoving everything into a bin, maybe if they're pill packs. And then I also see things not used the way they were intended. Maybe a hemostat wasn't used to clamp a vessel. Maybe it was used to open a medicine vial or get something out of a small space, or a screwdriver was used as, hey, this is a screwdriver. It should work on our back table to fix it, right? So some of those off-label uses of instruments, if you will, just because we have them on hand. And then just overuse, wear and tear.
Yeah. When I asked the question, I was thinking along the lines of physical damage, but I appreciate you launching immediately into some of the chemical damage that can happen with these instruments as well. You mentioned detergents and also saline. And so kind of these two buckets of problems that can happen either physically or chemically to the instrument to damage it. When you lay it out like that, it is an awful gauntlet that our instruments have to survive. As you think about, like, why is it that our instruments don't last longer? I challenge you. Well, actually, I don't challenge you because that wouldn't be safe, but I challenge you to come up with a device that could stand up to the high temp steam sterilization that it goes through, the amount of time it spends in water, the amount of time it comes in contact with chloride rich blood, and that can survive the abuse that the residents put on the instruments when they get creative about how they're going to use these instruments in surgery. It is a gauntlet to get through for sure. So as we're thinking about trying to take care of these instruments, let's rewind and talk about that chemical piece first. You mentioned saline and detergents. Anything in particular that you want to highlight about why those processes damage instruments and maybe what to keep an eye out for to identify those problems?
Depending on the make of your detergent, it could be too acidic, it could be too alkaline. So you really have to pay attention to your IFU of your instrument. Make sure you're using the right detergent, the right disinfectant on the instrument. Just because they're all silver doesn't mean they're made out of all the same things. So you have to really pay attention to your IFUs on your instruments. If there's ever a question, always refer to the IFU. Saline, we know that it's sodium chloride. It's going to damage the instruments. So always make sure at your point of use cleaning, right, you're using sterile water, you have sterile water in your field. I think a common misconception with saline is, oh, it's kind of like water, right? It'll work. No, it's not going to work.
It is clear like water.
It's the chemistry. Let's take it back.
No doubt. Yeah, anything that's got chlorides in it. Yeah.
I mean, that's my personal. Yeah, that's my personal opinion, that's why we label our medications. Everything's clear. So no, they don't do the same things. They don't have the same chemical reaction on those instruments. So always good to know the why behind why you can't use
for
something.
Sure. Thanks for walking us through that. And then with the physical damages, anything in particular that you want to highlight from the panoply of ways that these things can get broken, from stacking to improper use to getting damaged in the sink? Anything in particular that you want to highlight to try to avoid?
I would say know the instrument. I mean, if it comes in multiple different forms or you have to put it together, know how it goes together, know how you can take it apart safely without damaging it. And I think we're getting a lot of complex instruments lately. So always understand how those instruments go together, how they take apart so you don't damage there. And then educate every time you get a new instrument into the department, educate on that instrument, making sure you're crossing all your T's, dotting all your I's, how to treat it, how to clean it. And then just be mindful of the cost. Always bring to the forefront, if anything, the cost of the instruments and why it's so important to take care of these
yeah, for
items.
Sure. And potentially even the cost of the patient. If that's the only one you've got in the department, if it's broken, they can't use it in surgery. And so you've got to make sure that you take care of them physically. I think know your instrument is a good piece of advice around the physical damage conversation, because not all the instruments are going to get damaged in the same way. I remember a problem that we had in our department where we had a particular delicate tissue forceps. Maybe it was a tonsil clamp, I believe it was, that was a particular delicate kind. And because of the size of tray that we had it in, the distal tips kept sticking through the tray during reprocessing. And then when somebody would pick up the stringer, inevitably it would end up snagging in the basket and it would bend it. And it was our instrument repair tech who brought it to us and said, hey, guys, this one particular model number of clamp is coming back with this exact kind of damage every single month. Like, what are you guys doing to these things? Exactly.
What are you doing?
And it was that question that made us realize that long instrument was in kind of a short basket, and it was just the size of the container we had it in. And we changed the container size on it, and all of a sudden, poof, that physical damage problem went away. And so, yeah, knowing your instruments specifically can make a big difference in taking care of them for sure. So, as we're talking about instrument damage, I'm sure we don't need to spend any more time convincing people that instrument damage is a problem in the departments and that, it can get damaged in 100,000 different ways. So the question really comes back to, how do we prevent it, either on a preventative side, or how do we catch it afterwards to make sure damaged instruments don't go back up to the OR? So could you talk us through maybe what that process looks like, why it's so important to identify damage either before or after the damage has occurred?
So it's important to identify damage. It's important to inspect your instruments when you're putting them together. You can inspect them in decontam as well. But the reason why is because it all comes down to patient safety. I'll preach it again. If you have a damaged instrument and you're using it on a patient, it could harm their anatomy. It could not work the way they want to. In an emergency, it's not going to work the way it needs to. If there's a crack or a fracture in that instrument, bioburden can get in there. We won't be able to see it. And then you assume it's clean, and then patient comes back with an SSI, right? So it's very, very important that you're looking for damage, looking to make sure you have great instruments that are going to do what they're supposed to do in your instrument trays. And then, of course, cost implications. You want to make sure that you're repairing those instruments. And then if you keep damaging those instruments, you're going to have to keep replacing them. And it just adds up, right? So you want to make sure that you're keeping good containment of your instruments, making sure they're taken care of, placed in a tray, like you mentioned, the appropriate size, so it doesn't get damaged.
Sure. So as we think about how to avoid it, you said we need to be looking for damage. So this is primarily an inspection issue, maybe in decontamination, but primarily on that assembly side. There are certainly a lot of things we could do from a preventive standpoint, and I want to get into the preventive piece a little bit later. But zeroing in on that inspection piece, particularly in the assembly area of the department, what advice would you have for departments to start succeeding more at identifying damage in the assembly area in particular, more than just reminding people, like showing them an example of a broken instrument in a staff meeting, talking about patient safety, and say, look carefully at your instruments? Is there anything in particular we should be doing in that area to be succeeding at finding damage on surgical instruments?
So I was listening to a podcast for a repair technician, and he said he can come in and do an in-service on what he looks for or what he monitors. So I think that's a great idea. Partner with your vendor, bring that repair technician in. What do they look for? What are the key things that they see, the common things that they see, and educate your staff on that, because that's really what they're going to be looking for, especially if it's down to patient safety or it may be not something that's immediately recognizable. So work with your vendor partner and one, it takes a little bit of education off of you, the manager or the lead tech. And then two, it builds that relationship with your vendor to really get the conversations going and be open and asking questions, right?
Yeah, that's a great call out. I remember we had a tremendous repair vendor at the facility that I was managing, and they invited our technicians to come spend, 15, 20 minutes out on the repair truck while they were repairing instruments, which ended up being a really cool opportunity for those technicians to be able to watch what that repair truck was doing, like what types of damage they were looking for. Because as they were going through preventive maintenance, they're trying to decide which of these instruments are in need of repair and why, and kind of talk them through a set as they're working through it and identifying the instruments that need repair. And then for them to be able to see what that repair looks like was kind of eye-opening, not only from a career perspective for the technicians, but also I think it made them better technicians. So if you've got an on-site specialist coming to your facility doing instrument repair, you might ask them if they mind if you rotate people through. You don't have to spend, hours at a time out there, but rotate people through just to see a little bit of the process if you can afford the time. I think it would be well worth it. So yeah, education, training, absolutely top of the list for how to get our inspection process right. Any tools or processes in particular you used as a sterile processing manager to make sure that inspections were happening, that scissors were sharp, that tips of devices met up, that scopes were clear, anything that you would recommend people have physically in their department to help their technicians?
Maybe not physically, but instrument auditing. Audit your tray. Just random, doesn't have to be a particular person or particular day. Just pick up a tray, you inspect it yourself as a manager and see who the last person processed it if you find anything. And then, have that opportunity to educate. And then if you come across a tray, if you audit a tray and it looks great and everything's sharp and cuts the way it needs to, recognize that. Recognize something that's good. We mentioned that in the previous podcast. Excel at excellence. We don't always have to say educate on bad things. Let's educate on good things too, that what we've done well. I think that boosts morale in the department as well. So that, hey, let's highlight something you're doing good. Hey, maybe we need to educate a little bit on this because I find this often.
I love that. So many people think that the person doing the instrument audits is kind of the boogeyman. Like they get nervous, like, oh no, they got a hold of my tray. And yeah, how refreshing would it be to have that instrument auditor come up to you afterwards and just give you the pat on the back and say, this tray met every expectation we have for our department. It was perfect in every way we expect it to be perfect. Really good job. And then move on. Like if that was 80% of the interactions that you had with your quality assurance person doing tray audits, whether that's your manager or a lead tech or something, that could shift the tide on what those conversations feel like when they pick up your tray. So yeah, great piece of advice. So that's advice on catching damage after it's happened. What types of things should we be doing to be preventive to try to make sure the damage isn't happening to our instruments, or at least isn't happening again after we've kind of uncovered some trends?
I think just letting the OR know what you find, building that collaboration again, especially if it didn't happen in the SPD, if it happened in the OR, or we don't know where it happened, let's just bring it to the forefront and let everybody aware of what we found, just to keep it in the back of everybody's mind, like, hey, we should really take care of that. I found that with instruments and soft goods, bringing the attention to how much things cost makes people more aware of how they're treating things. So when you tell them like, hey, this scope costs $3,000, like we have to take care of it, that's like an automatic click. Hey, I need to make sure this is at the top. I don't put anything on it. I maybe put it back in its case and just do some extra protection there. But bringing costs to the forefront always speaks volumes, because if you put it into perspective, like, okay, well, what if I just threw your AirPods down on the ground, right? Or your iPhone 16 down and it's going to damage it, or put something on top of it. You really don't want that to happen. So kind of relating it back to something personal is always a good process when you're speaking about cost.
Yeah, you're speaking my language, but I'm personally kind of cheap with my finances story. I never could get the vendors who would come in our department to handle trays carefully. This damage conversation is reminding me of like the famous hole in the wrap conversation around vendor trays. And I still have thoughts laying in bed late at night of these vendors just slamming these trays into case cards. Like, what are you doing? Like, it's gonna have a hole in it later. So yeah, definitely, if you have to grab somebody by the lapels and like let them know how serious care and handling is, yeah, do it, because we got to make sure that they're handled well throughout the whole chain of custody, whether that's sterile processing, OR, vendor, and everybody in between. So I'm curious, as we're talking about this conversation of preventing damage in our instruments, if you could maybe take us through a practical example, maybe your favorite or honestly your least favorite instrument to deal with, and how you would approach a care and handling issue in particular with that instrument. Maybe you're discovering a trend in damage and you don't want to create a new cultural war in the OR by, sending a barrage of pictures over, but you also need to address the issue.
Right. What I found the most was damage with eye instruments. They're so delicate, they're so small, and they were very hard to keep good condition. And I think we found that it was because the way we were cleaning them or what we were using to clean them with that was causing the damage. The damage that they were seeing with the eye trays, it was like tenfold because it's under a microscope. They're doing eyes under a microscope. They're seeing every little nook and cranny. And then the surgeon actually came to me as a manager and said, hey, like, I'm putting this in somebody's eye, and if this is crooked even a millimeter, it's going to damage this person's eye. And that really opened my eyes to like, hey, what's our process? What are we doing? How are we cleaning these instruments? And then really changing that perspective, changing that workflow, and making sure like, hey, when these eye trays come in, we have to take particular care of these instruments because one, they cost a lot, and two, they're using them in such a delicate situation. We want to make sure we're providing good patient quality care.
Yeah, that connection between standard workflow and the results that you're getting on your instruments is really important, because it can be tempting in that moment to see that one tray has come back and it's that same surgeon who's been talking about this quite a bit and the instruments are damaged again, and you ask for the label of who processed that tray. You go back to that one employee, you really tell him how important it is that we get this one tray right. Maybe there's some consequence associated with that mistake because there's been lots of training about identifying this bit of damage, and then you move on and wait until the next event happens and kind of blow up the next employee, and it doesn't work. But when you get to the workflow piece of it and say, okay, so where is this damage coming from? How is it coming? And work on trying to prevent the damage in the first place, that's a much more powerful solution than just trying to elevate the awareness of the people who are supposed to catch the damage. Like, let's stop the damage, not only just catch the damage. Or maybe let's do both. I don't know. But yeah, I appreciate you underlining that for us as we're trying to fix issues. And then that piece about micro instruments being looked at under a microscope, I don't know, like, what do we do about that, Tori? Because I think that's always going to be a struggle in microsurgery, in ears and eyes and tiny surgery, where our physicians are looking at these under, 10, 20, 40, 100x magnification. And we're just looking at it with our, 10/15 or 20/60 vision in sterile processing that needs some help. Like, should we be putting microscopes in our assembly areas to try to replicate what surgeons are seeing? Like, what have you found helpful in inspecting those micro instruments?
For the micro instruments, I mean, a lot of the times we didn't know until they were using them, like I mentioned. Would it be a good idea? Those microscopes are expensive. They are crazy expensive. So would I recommend of SPD trying to buy that to use to inspect instruments? Probably not. But a good process to keep in mind is, hey, if the surgeon's using this under a microscope and they say something about the instrument, tag it, let us know. We want to get that replaced as soon as possible. We want to fix it. Explain to us what they saw. Was it a crack? Was it bent? So that way we know. And then again, looking at our process. Am I not providing the supplies the SPD techs need to clean these appropriately or clean these gently? Where do I need to change? Do I need to buy different supplies? Do I need to put these instruments in is it happening in the washer? Do I need to protect them a little bit better in the washer? So I think really navigating where the damage is happening, how we can improve our process and make these better to further apprehend those complaints or those problems.
Yeah, you ended with the word complaints or problems. I think it's okay to say complaints because it has a negative connotation to it, but there's a lot of negative feelings associated with getting an instrument back for the 7th time that you've told Sterile Processing again and again, like we have to have this perfect and it keeps coming back. Can you talk to us a little bit about kind of the cultural implications that can come from instrument damage issues? Maybe the story about the eye surgeon is a good one, but how not getting instrument care and handling and preventive repair right can really tear down the hard work that you've done culturally with your OR?
Oh, man. I mean, when you repeatedly have a problem and it's constant and you just built this great relationship, you just collaborated on your point of use cleaning policy, and then now you have this eye instrument that keeps coming down, it keeps getting bent, or something's lost, or you can't find it, or this is damaged, or we don't have this, we haven't had this for 2 weeks. It really, really puts a damage on the morale, and you feel like you crossed a hurdle, and then now you're taking 2 steps back. It can be really damaging. So working and collaborating, not doing a blame game, because we don't know where it happened. We don't know if SPD is fully responsible, if it was the way we cleaned it or the way that it was sent downstairs. So really just looking at it from an open perspective, not placing blame on anybody. Hey, how do we fix this? I understand that it happened, but let's look at this in real detail and see where the problem truly lies, take accountability, whether it's SPD or OR, and then say, how do we prevent this from happening again?
Sure. And nobody's happy in those conversations whenever we're having those issues. And depending on how serious it is, sometimes those are the types of things that your OR never forgets. Somebody accidentally drops an ink pen in a tray and sterilizes it. Like, yeah, that's an event that's going to keep coming up for the next 5 years, like it or not. And so what would you do to try to help kind of take the first steps culturally to address an issue? Maybe it's one where there's fingers being pointed in both directions, like your endoscope repair budget is just through the roof and nobody knows, is it the surgeons, the residents, the surgical assistants who are transporting the trays? Is it decontamination? Is it the person who sterilized it forgot to put the right cap on? And like trying to figure out where the damage is coming from. Like, how do you collaboratively work on a big, expensive problem like that together in a way that builds a positive culture?
I think just sitting down with your OR leadership as an SPD manager and saying, hey, this is happening. We need to find out where it's happening and say, OR leader, I want you to observe these cases at this time. Tell me what you find. I'm going to observe my processes, see what I find, and let's come back together and talk about what we found and where the process, because it could be both areas. Something could be happening here, something could be happening here, and we found that collectively together and we fixed it together. I feel like when you assign responsibilities and you both know that you're working to accomplish the same goal and you're going to come together and establish maybe a new policy, another one. I think that really, really builds relationships. It builds your culture. And when your leaders are getting along and your leaders are communicating, it trickles down to your staff, right? So I think it's very important.
Absolutely. And yeah, culture is more than just, well, like you said, as it trickles down to the staff, it's more than just feeling happy in your work. Like even culture has a real patient impact. If your work culture with your OR is such that there's so much finger pointing, so much yelling, so much mistreatment that staff feel so underappreciated that they would rather take a pay cut to go work at McDonald's than continue working in your department, all of a sudden you don't have enough technicians to process the instruments. The instrument damage issues get worse. The patient safety concerns continue to elevate, and it just keeps spiraling. So yeah, thanks for walking us through that collaborative approach. I think this cultural conversation is a great place to end our conversation around instrument damage. I feel like every one of these topics that's going to come up on this podcast series is going to touch on this culture piece, because it weaves its web through all of what we do in sterile processing, and the value of winning that trust from your OR through excellent processes, through clear communication, through collaborative approaches, just makes all of these processes work better, whether you're talking about point of use treatment like we did last week, whether you're talking about trying to identify and fix instrument damage problems. And then as we look forward to next week, I want to dive more into that conversation that you brought up around instrument auditing, because that's something that departments maybe aren't doing today because either they're too busy or they tried it once and it just blew up their staff culture. And so like we're not doing that again. We're just going to let the OR tell us. I want to hear some more about your perspective on that. So, Tori, great conversation today. Thank you for walking us through the instrument damage conversation. Thanks for joining the show. And I look forward to talking to you next week as we dive into auditing.
Looking forward to it. Thanks, Bobby.
That was Tory Teakell, Clinical Solutions Manager at Medline, and now officially a friend of the Beyond Clean show, talking to us about how to care well for our surgical instruments. And there were a lot of issues that were brought up in this one that we honestly could have spent quite a bit more time digging into, particularly that audit conversation, which is why we're going to spend a whole episode talking about that next week on episode 3, but also around this problem of how do we solve the inspection issue for complex devices where we don't have the same tools that they have in the OR. I'm thinking about rigid scopes and flexible scopes. We talked about micro instruments, and certainly technology's advancing in these areas. We think about the handheld videos that we can hook up to like a CMAC or an anesthesia scope that maybe would be able to help us test the functionality, or certainly the conversation around borescopes and inspecting inside lumens, which is a whole world that we didn't even get to address. I've even seen departments get little digital microscopes that you can buy off, Amazon for $20 and USB, hook it into your computer, and all of a sudden you've got a kind of crude 40x magnifier where maybe you could look at your micro instruments that way. So if you've got any good tips, tricks, hacks for technology that you're implementing in your department that are useful beyond just the standard 5-10x magnification that we recommend at the assembly station, do let us know. Maybe we'll continue this conversation around instrument inspection. But with that, we'll go ahead and wrap the conversation. We'll look forward to talking to you again next week on instrument auditing. But until we talk to you then, on behalf of the Beyond Clean team, keep fighting dirty. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Process Better. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to Beyond Clean on your favorite podcast app, or by downloading the Beyond Clean smartphone app on iPhone or Android. In the app, you can access bonus content for certain episodes and filter episodes by category. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to give us a 5-star rating and review. Your feedback matters and is important to us. We look forward to hearing from you.